So let's start a new psalm. Creative of me to go to Psalm 25. This is a longer psalm. It's a psalm that David wrote, and I well, let's just begin. In you, Lord my God, I put my trust. Oh boy. Speaking for myself, that is one of the most challenging things in my life, is trusting God. But there is this about what David wrote. He said, I put my trust. I've talked about this before, but I'm going to talk about it again because it's appropriate here. Back when I was serving the Cornerstone Church in Manchester, Iowa, our music guy and his wife bought a little puppy that, I'm serious, it was no bigger than this. And it was just like a puffball. Cute as a button, but man, its mission in its early life, when they would bring it to the church office, was to pee and poop in as many different locations as was possible. I like dogs, fine, and this little dog was just so cute you couldn't not love it, but it required more attention than they generally would give it. Meaning, instead of closing it in his office, he would leave the door open and he wouldn't pay attention to when it wandered. And one of the problems with that is that when it wandered, that's when it did its business. So eventually he learned, go get the puppy and put it back. But you had to go get it and put it back and go get it and put it back and go get it. And I mean, it was like, you're lucky if the puppy stayed in one place for a minute. That is the way my trust is. I put it in the Lord my God. And then it drifts, and I have to put it back, and then it drifts, and I have to put it back. And daily, I've never counted the number of times, but a simple estimate would be 1,000,000. I have to put my trust in God. My trusting God does not come naturally to me. Now, my best friend who's waiting for me in heaven, David Shelton, it was very natural for him. He just trusted God. I admire him for that. I'm not wired that way. And I don't think I'm a bad guy because I'm not wired to instinctively trust. There are many psychological reasons for this. And I've thought about them and I've journaled about them, and I'd like to say, and I put them to rest. No, I haven't. I'm still struggling with that. Do you struggle with putting your trust in God, or with the fact that you have to constantly put your trust, put it again? Okay, I've got to put my, in fact, I've shared this before, so I did this years ago now, when I realized that keeping my trust in God, having put my trust in Him, and then it staying, is a challenge for me. I pray differently. Most of my prayers are, please help me, please help me, please help me, give me this, I need that. And I don't think God gets frustrated with. It's impossible for a God who knows everything to be ever frustrated. So he doesn't get frustrated with me when I pray in that way. But I've decided instead, and this for my benefit, and honestly, any prayer I pray is for my benefit or for someone else's. But my praying doesn't enlarge God in any way. But I have substituted, please help me, please give me, please whatever. I've substituted just the phrasing in this one way. God, today I trust you for your provision. And then I journal my prayers in the morning. I'm reading through the Bible using my YouVersion app. And so I read the day's designated scriptures, and then I journal my prayers. And the reason is because I don't know that I have ODD as much as OD shiny. I just get distracted so easily. But when I pray, when I journal in this way, I write, I put my trust in you for these things because I need the reminder that I am putting my trust in him, not to execute my plan, because my best plan is way not as good as any plan that God has. I mean, realistically, let's think about that. Your plan will never be as good as God's plan. I mean, it's like putting a Mexican Chihuahua up against Albert Einstein, only worse. In you, Lord, my God, I put my trust. I want to challenge you that beginning your day with that as a prayer is a supremely good way to start. It's a reminder to yourself, a confession of your trust in God that that's not gonna, God's not up in heaven with even a golf clap for that. He doesn't need that from me or you, but we need it. And by the way, I think I can make a pretty good case for what pleases God is me trusting him. Hebrews, I believe it's in chapter 11, without faith, it is impossible to please God. Now, if you interpret that, one of the ways to interpret it would be to say, since it's impossible to please him without faith, then it stands to reason that faith is what pleases him. I want to please him, and there's nothing wrong with that desire. I grew up believing that what pleased God was obedience. I'm not saying God doesn't want me to obey, but if I want to please him, it comes down to trusting him, having faith. And out of that faith will come obedience. But it's very difficult when you get those things flopped. So begin the day. In you, Lord my God, I put my trust. Okay, move on. Verse 2. I trust in you. Again, he just reiterates. And it's almost like as we read on, David is sort of setting up a quid pro quo of sorts with God. I trust in you. Do not let me be put to shame, nor let my enemies triumph over me. When I was a youth minister way back in the day, I used to lead a chorus, and it was from this: "Unto you, O Lord, I lift up my voice. Don't let my enemies triumph over me. Don't let me be put to shame." Now, there's a lot of different ways to interpret this and think it through. When David wrote this, he had literal enemies. He had people who wanted to kill him. He was king. He had enemies of Israel, and personal enemies. So, it makes sense that he would ask God to protect him so that his enemies wouldn't triumph over him. But don't let me be put to shame. Okay, that when an enemy triumphed, it made the victim shameful. Duh. Isn't that true today? Now, you might have some actual, real, true enemies. More likely, our enemies are less personal in terms of I have fleshly enemies. For me, it's my enemy, my primary enemy is the devil. The Apostle Peter writes, be alert, sober-minded in some versions. Your enemy, the devil, is like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. Well, okay, that fits with my life. And what David is saying is, Lord, don't let the enemies overcome me. Being overcome by my enemy would bring shame to me. Okay, but there are sometimes I'm my enemy. I have counseled many couples who believed their spouse was their enemy. And the truth is, your spouse is not your enemy. They disagree with you. They don't do everything you want them to do, and they certainly don't do what you want them to do in the way you want them to do it. But they're not your enemy. Pride is my enemy. Can't tell you the number of times that this enemy, pride, has shamed me. My own flesh, this body is often my enemy. One of the things that always makes me laugh, but then I go, well, yeah, it is. I read that St. Francis of Assisi nicknamed his body Brother Ass because it was so obstinate. Well, you know what? In a few weeks, I'll be 70, and I can tell you, my body is obstinate. It doesn't do what it used to do. Some things that I used to do, I didn't hardly even have to give them a thought. I better think it through now. Or, you got to be old to know. Today, what's your enemy? I'm not so much thinking about who's your enemy, except you're probably like me. You find yourself as your enemy. It's reasonable to call out to God, don't let me be put to shame by my enemies. Don't let my enemies triumph over me. You can't do this by pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. This is not a matter of pure self-will. You got to have help. David knew that. So that's a challenge for today. I'll see you next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.